The guard had just tightened his grip on my arm when a voice came from behind us. "Let her go. Now." It wasn't loud, but it cut cleanly through the room. The kind of voice people don't ignore. The guard froze. "Before I tell you what happened to me, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel, but only if you're genuinely interested. I'm also curious about the city you live in and what the temperature is there right now. Now let me take you back to that room." Around the VIP table, conversations stopped mid-sentence. A few phones were still raised, recording. The orchestra continued somewhere in the ballroom, but here the air had shifted. I didn't turn immediately. I didn't need to. I recognized the voice. Caleb Vaughn, Aurora Dynamics head of investor strategy, was moving quickly toward us. Right behind him was Miranda Cole, the company's chief legal officer. Neither of them looked confused. They looked like they had just realized something very serious was happening on camera. Caleb's eyes went straight to the guard's hand on my arm. "Take your hands off her," he said. The guard released me instantly, as if he had just touched something he shouldn't have. Lydia Carrington crossed her arms, irritation sharpening her expression. "She's sitting at the wrong table," she said coldly. "We're just dealing with no Caleb." Cut in. The word landed harder than anything she had said. "You're the one who doesn't understand what's happening." The table went completely silent. Across from us, Eleanor Price, one of the board members, looked from Caleb to me, the polite smile fading from her face. Around the room, several guests lowered their glasses, their attention fully locked on us now. Caleb turned slightly, addressing not just Lydia, but everyone within earshot. The cameras, the witnesses. "Let me make this very clear," he said. Then he pointed at me. "This is Tara Dean." My name seemed to settle into the room with weight. A few people glanced down at the place card in front of me. TD Caleb continued, his voice calm but precise. "She is the final authorized representative from Crestline Capital for the Aurora transaction." The silence deepened. He took one step closer to Lydia. In simpler terms, he said she's the one who approves the capital release. He paused just long enough, then finished. "If she says no, the $2.9 billion commitment being announced tonight doesn't exist." No one moved. I adjusted my sleeve and finally met Lydia's eyes. "I told you," I said quietly, "you're making a very big mistake. The following section contains some fictional elements and is AI-assisted for storytelling and educational purposes, and is completely unrelated to any individual or group. I hope you enjoyed this story. If not, please get some rest, stay healthy, and see you again soon." The reaction was immediate. Lydia's expression faltered for the first time. Not fear, just a brief, visible crack in certainty. Around the table, the subtle confidence people carry at events like this began to disappear. Someone near the edge of the VIP section whispered, "Did he say Crestline Capital?" Another voice quieter. The full commitment. No one laughed now. I let the silence stretch, not forcing it, just allowing it to do what silence does when people realize they've misjudged something important. Across the room, a new presence shifted the atmosphere again. "What's going on here?" The voice carried authority without effort. Heads turned almost instantly. Marcus Hale, CEO of Aurora Dynamics, had just stepped into the VIP section. He moved with the posture of someone expecting a room to open for him, prepared to greet investors, deliver remarks, control the narrative of the evening. But it took him only a few seconds to understand that control had already slipped. He saw Lydia first, then the security guards stepping back, then Caleb and Miranda, both unusually still, and finally me. He slowed. "Can someone explain what's happening?" he asked. No one answered right away. The silence lasted just long enough to feel deliberate. Then Caleb spoke. "Your wife," he said evenly, "just had security attempt to remove the person responsible for Crestline's capital authorization." The words didn't echo, but they didn't need to. Marcus turned his head toward me, then back to Caleb. The calculation behind his eyes happened quickly, faster than most people in the room could follow. This wasn't social discomfort. This was exposure. Lydia crossed her arms again, defensive now. I thought she was staff, she said. She was in the wrong seat. And Lydia Marcus cut her off. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried a different weight now. Not irritation. Control. He didn't look at her again. Instead, he turned fully toward me. For the first time, he actually studied my face, measured careful. "Miss Dean?" he said, his voice shifting into something more diplomatic. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." I didn't respond. Not immediately. He took a breath, adjusting his approach. "Perhaps we should step aside." He continued and discussed this privately. Before I could answer, Miranda spoke. Quiet. Precise. This was recorded. Marcus went still. His eyes moved slowly toward the cameras mounted along the ceiling. Then to the phones still pointed in our direction. And in that moment, he understood something his wife still hadn't. This wasn't a situation. It was evidence. Daniel Mercer was the one who suggested we move. The executive lounge sat just beyond the ballroom, quiet, insulated, a place designed for controlled conversations. The door closed behind us, and the music from the gala disappeared instantly, replaced by something heavier. Inside, 4 people took seats across from me. Marcus Hale, Caleb Vaughn, Miranda Cole, and Victor Lynn, the company's CFO. Lydia wasn't invited. Neither was anyone else from the table. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence felt different here. Less public, more deliberate. Marcus finally broke it. "Miss Dean!" He began, keeping his voice measured. This was clearly a misunderstanding. The word hung in the air, too small for what had already unfolded. Miranda didn't react. Neither did I. "Misunderstandings," I said calmly, "don't usually involve security." Marcus's gaze dropped briefly to the table before returning to me. "My wife believed you were—" He stopped. Whatever word he had intended to use would have sounded worse spoken out loud. I didn't help him. Instead, I asked a different question. Was tonight's gala being streamed to investors? The room went still again. Miranda answered first. "Yes." She opened the folder in front of her, precise and composed. Internal cameras were active. Portions of the event were broadcast live to our investor audience. All footage is archived. I nodded slightly. Then I opened my own folder. In the investment agreement between Crestlane Capital and Aurora Dynamics, I said, turning a page, there's a clause labeled Conduct Integrity. Victor frowned, already reaching for a printed copy on the table. His fingers moved quickly, scanning. "Section 14, he said under his breath. Miranda leaned closer, reading. Her expression shifted. "It doesn't require intent," she said quietly. "Only documented conduct." Marcus leaned back slightly, eyes moving between Miranda and Victor. "Are you saying Miranda didn't let him finish?" "I'm saying what happened downstairs qualifies." Her tone wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. Victor's finger stayed on the page, tracing the exact line, as if confirming it wouldn't disappear. "Material damage to the reputation of the transaction," he read quietly, "triggered by conduct from senior leadership or affiliated parties." He stopped there. No one needed the rest. Marcus exhaled slowly, but the shift in his posture was unmistakable now. This was no longer a conversation about optics. It had become structural risk. "Let's be clear," he said, regaining a degree of control. "There was no intent to damage the transaction." "That's not relevant," Miranda replied. Her eyes didn't leave the document. "The clause doesn't require intent, only that the conduct is documented and materially harmful." Silence followed, the kind that forces people to think in consequences, not arguments. I closed my folder. "This provision exists for situations exactly like this," I said. Victor finally looked up, his expression tighter now. "If the clause is triggered," he asked carefully, "what happens next?" I met his gaze. "The fund reserves the right to withdraw immediately." No emphasis. No threat. Just the structure of the agreement stated as it was written. Marcus's jaw tightened slightly. "You're not suggesting," he said, choosing his words with care, "that a single incident at a gala becomes significant." I said calmly, "When it's recorded public and reflects leadership behavior during an active transaction." Miranda gave a small nod. That's exactly how it would be interpreted. The room fell quiet again. Not uncertain this time. Defined. Because for the first time since the night began, everyone in that room understood the same thing. The deal hadn't collapsed, but it was no longer secure. Marcus stayed very still, but I could see the shift behind his eyes. He was recalculating. Not the numbers, those were already clear. The control. I understand why your wife assumed I was staff, I said, my tone even. To be fair, most people do. No one interrupted. I'm not the person who gives keynote speeches, I continued. I'm not featured in press releases. My name doesn't appear in headlines when deals are announced. Victor watched me closely now. Neither did Miranda. My role isn't designed to be visible, I said. It's designed to be final. Marcus's expression tightened slightly. At Crestline Capital, I went on my title is Director of Transaction Compliance. It doesn't sound particularly powerful. A faint pause. But in transactions of this size, the structure matters more than the title. I opened the folder again, turning it toward them. The capital commitment for Aurora Dynamics is divided into multiple tranches, I explained. The initial release requires final authorization. Victor nodded slowly. From the fund, he said. Yes, I replied. But not from the CEO. That landed. Marcus didn't move. Victor frowned already, anticipating the answer. The board, he asked. I shook my head. Independent Compliance Authority, I said. Then I let the silence hold for a second longer. In this case, me. No one spoke. The realization moved through the room quietly but completely. Marcus's focus sharpened. Miranda leaned back slightly, processing. Victor looked down at the agreement again, as if seeing it for the first time. I closed the folder. Money doesn't move because people expect it to, I said. It moves when every condition is satisfied. I met Marcus's eyes. And right now, I added calmly, that condition hasn't been met. No one argued. Because at that moment, they all understood something they hadn't before. The deal wasn't waiting to close. It was waiting on me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply refused to authorize the release of the $2.9 billion after what they did, and let the contract speak for itself. If you were in my position, would you have done the same? If you agree with my decision, leave a 1 in the comments. The meeting ended without a conclusion. No one tried to stop me as I gathered my folder, and walked toward the door. Miranda remained seated, already reviewing notes. Victor had the agreement open in front of him again. Marcus said nothing. That told me enough. Outside, the hallway felt quieter than it should have. The distant music from the ballroom had dulled into something almost unrecognizable, like the event itself had moved on without them. I stopped near a window overlooking the city. Then I took out my phone. There was only one person I needed to call. Samir, I said when the line connected. He picked up immediately. I need to report an incident. I didn't add emotion. I didn't need to. I described what had happened at the VIP table in exact terms, who was involved, what actions were taken, and the fact that it occurred during a live-streamed event with multiple recordings. On the other end, Samir didn't interrupt once. When I finished, there was a brief pause. Then one question. Was it documented? I glanced up. A small camera was mounted high in the hallway corner, still active. Yes, I said. The silence that followed wasn't uncertainty. It was confirmation. I understand, Samir replied. The call ended there. No discussion, no hesitation. Inside the executive lounge, I knew the situation was already evolving. Legal review, internal escalation, board-level awareness. But none of that would change what had already been set in motion. This wasn't about reaction anymore. It was about process. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and looked once more through the glass. Behind me, somewhere past the closed doors, they were still trying to stabilize something that had already begun to shift. And for the first time that night, the outcome was no longer theirs to control. By the time I stepped away from the window, the tone inside the building had already changed. Not visibly, but structurally. Marcus found me in the hallway a few minutes later. His pace was controlled, but there was urgency underneath it, now the kind executives try to hide when the timeline is no longer theirs. Tara, he said, stopping a few steps away. I know what happened wasn't handled properly. That was as close as he could get. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. But if you can give us until morning, he continued, we can review everything. Clarify the situation. Make sure this doesn't escalate further. I looked at him. I'm not issuing an ultimatum, I said calmly. I'm following the agreement. He held my gaze for a moment longer, searching for flexibility that wasn't there. Then he nodded once. Behind him, the executive lounge door opened briefly. Voices carried out low, overlapping tense. A board call had already begun. The timing didn't surprise me. This deal had been visible, watched, anticipated by too many parties to contain quietly. Now it was unstable. Across the building, people were stepping into corners with their phones, directors joining remotely, legal teams reviewing clauses they had assumed would never matter. Inside that room, they weren't discussing perception anymore. They were mapping consequences. Marcus turned back toward the door, but hesitated for half a second. How much time do we have? He asked. I didn't answer immediately, because the truth was simple. Time had already been spent. Not as much as you think, I said. He exhaled quietly, then walked back inside. I remained where I was, not waiting, just observing the shift, because once a process like this begins, it doesn't pause for negotiation. It moves forward exactly as designed. The first notification didn't come to me. It went to Victor Lin. An email, short, formal, precise. Crestline Capital withdraws its capital commitment. He read it once, then again, then a third time, as if repetition might change the outcome. It didn't. Within minutes, his phone began to vibrate across the conference table. Calls stacked one over another, board members, partner banks, legal advisors, co-investors, every line carrying the same question. What happened inside the executive conference room? The atmosphere shifted from controlled tension to active disruption. Conversations overlapped. Documents were pulled up, printed, reviewed again in real time. Marcus stood at the head of the table, staring at the screen in front of him. He had known this was possible. Miranda had explained the clause. Victor had confirmed it. But knowing something can happen and watching it happen are two very different experiences. He picked up his phone and called me. I let it ring once before answering. Tara, he said, his voice rougher now, stripped of the polish from the night before. We can still fix this. He paused. We can issue a statement. Clarify what happened. Contain the narrative before it spreads further. I listened, then answered. It was recorded. Silence. Not confusion. Recognition. On his end, the conference room door opened. Victor stepped in, holding a printed document. His expression had changed, no longer analytical, but resigned. The primary tranche is gone, Victor said quietly. He placed the paper on the table, and the rest of the structure is starting to collapse with it. A voice from the board call cut through the speaker. This is going to cost us everything. No one disagreed. Outside the building, the markets were already reacting. Signals moving faster than explanations. Confidence adjusting before statements could be drafted. Back on the line, Marcus didn't speak again. Because there was nothing left to negotiate. The deal wasn't delayed. It wasn't being revised. It had been removed. And the system that allowed it to happen hadn't malfunctioned. It had worked exactly as intended. The confirmation spread faster than any internal explanation ever could. Within hours, the withdrawal had reached the people who mattered most. Banks, institutional partners, co-investors, who had aligned their timelines with Aurora Dynamics' deal. No one was asking whether it was real. They were asking why. Inside the company, the answer wasn't simple. It couldn't be reduced to a single moment, even if everyone knew where it started. The board moved quickly. An internal investigation was launched before noon. Not as a formality, but as a necessity. Directors wanted a full reconstruction, who authorized security, why the situation escalated, how it was allowed to happen in a room full of senior leadership. Miranda led the legal review. Victor reopened every document tied to the financing structure. Marcus remained at the center of it, but not in control the way he had been the night before. Now he was responding instead of directing. Outside the company, the narrative formed differently. There was no official statement linking the withdrawal to the gala. No press release mentioning the confrontation at the VIP table. Only the number appeared. $2.9 billion. Withdrawn. And a single phrase attached to it. Governance concerns. That was enough. In private channels, the details traveled faster. A 30-second clip began circulating among investment circles, shared quietly, replayed repeatedly. A hand on my arm. Lydia's voice. The moment Caleb stepped in. The kind of footage that doesn't need commentary. It explains itself. Names followed. Lydia Carrington, Eleanor Price. Not as hosts of an event, but as variables in a failure. Over the next few days, messages reached me from different directions. Board members, advisors, intermediaries, each one proposing some version of the same idea: reopen discussions, restructure terms, rebuild confidence. I gave them the same answer each time: polite, consistent, unchanged. A deal doesn't collapse because of a single moment, I said. It collapses because of what that moment reveals. There was no argument against that, because the issue had never been the seat or the misunderstanding. It was the behavior that followed and what it signaled to anyone watching. And in transactions at this level, perception isn't secondary, it's structural. By the end of the week, the market had adjusted. The opportunity was gone, not postponed, not renegotiated, gone. And no amount of explanation could bring it back. I didn't go back to the gala. There was nothing left there for me. By the time I returned to my office a few days later, everything looked exactly the same as before. Same desk, same files, same quiet rhythm of new transactions waiting to be reviewed. No announcements, no celebration, just work. That's the part people rarely understand. There's no moment where everything stops and acknowledges what happened. No dramatic victory, no closing statement, just consequences. One of my colleagues mentioned the story that had started circulating quietly but persistently through the industry. The numbers, the withdrawal, the speculation. I listened, then shrugged. People think power walks into a room with a title, I said. But sometimes it sits quietly at the end of the table. He didn't respond. Most people don't. Because that kind of power doesn't look the way they expect it to. I opened the next file in front of me, scanning the first page. Another deal. Another set of conditions. Another system designed to work exactly as written. For a moment, I thought back to that night. The chair, the hand on my arm, the silence around the table. It had never really been about where I was sitting. It was about how they chose to act when they thought it didn't matter. Because in business, respect isn't a courtesy. It's a signal, a measurable one. And when that signal breaks, everything built on top of it becomes unstable. Later that afternoon, I closed the file and leaned back slightly. Deals don't collapse in a single moment. They collapse in the space between behavior and consequence. That night, the seat at table 3 was just a chair. But the way they took it cost them $2.9 billion. I didn't raise my voice that night. I didn't fight for the seat. I simply let their actions reveal who they were and trusted the system to respond. What stayed with me wasn't the money, but how quickly respect disappears when people think no one important is watching, and how powerful it is to remain calm when you actually hold the leverage. If you were in that position, misjudged, dismissed in front of everyone, would you react emotionally, or would you stay still and let the truth work for you? If this story made you think differently about power, respect, or self-worth, then you're already part of something bigger. One comment or one subscription from you could help this message reach someone who needs it at the right moment. And sometimes, that's how real change begins quietly but powerfully.